Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Walsh, Director of the Center for American Women and Politics at the Eagleton Institute of Politics, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the virtual Senator Wynona Lipman Chair Lecture. We are pleased so many of you are joining us for this program, perhaps because you heard about it from one of our many event co-sponsors. You can find their names listed on our website, and I'd like to thank each of them for their participation and for helping us spread the word. Our speaker today will be taking questions, and you can post your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll try to get as many of them answered as we can. As many of you know, today's program is made possible by the generous support of the New Jersey Legislature for the Senator Wynona Lipman Chair in Women's Political Leadership. A native of LaGrange, Georgia, Wynona Lipman received her PhD in French literature in 1952 from Columbia University. She taught French at Morehouse College and tutored Martin Luther King Jr. when he was a student there. She moved to Montclair in the late 50s, where she raised her family and began her extraordinary political career. In 1968, she was elected as an Essex County freeholder, and in 1971, she was elected to the New Jersey State Senate. She was the first Black woman in the State Senate, and she represented Essex County for 27 years in the New Jersey legislature. Over those years, she became the strongest and most consistent voice in the legislature for women and people of color. She was the leading advocate for children, families, low-income people, small businesses, and people with AIDS. She tackled issues including employment discrimination, marriage law, child support, sexual assault, domestic violence, and the rights of children. Senator Lipman also taught at Essex County College and was a great supporter of New Jersey's community colleges. For many of her years in the Senate, she was the only woman and the only person of color there, always speaking up for those with the least access to political power, always alert to the political implications of race and gender. I encourage you to learn more about this political pioneer by reading her full bio on our website. Through the legislature's continuing support for the Lipman Chair, we have been able to bring an extraordinary roster of distinguished women to Rutgers to inspire us, and today is no exception. This year's Lipman Lecture is being delivered by ABC News correspondent Linsey Davis. Linsey joined ABC News in 2007, and she files reports for World News, Good Morning America, 2020, and Nightline. She also anchors 2 primetime news hours on ABC News Live. Davis has covered major news stories around the globe, including the Las Vegas massacre, Harvey Weinstein allegations and subsequent #MeToo movement stories, the Boston Marathon bombing, the Nairobi Mall massacre, and several of former President Barack Obama's trips overseas. Her coverage ranges from the 2016 presidential election to social injustice and various natural disasters, including the earthquake in Haiti and multiple hurricanes. She moderated ABC News's Democratic presidential debates in September of 2019 and February 2020, and leading up to the Iowa caucuses, she interviewed the spouses of 7 of the presidential candidates as part of a terrific series called Running Mates. Davis has received multiple honors for her reporting, including 2 Emmy Awards and a regional Edward R. Murrow Award. I am very mindful of the moment that we are coming together to hear from Linsey. I have thought about Senator Lipman quite a bit since the history-making election of Kamala Harris. I know she would be cheering for this enormous breakthrough, but at the same time would be lamenting the fact that with Vice President-elect Harris's departure from the Senate, no Black women will be serving in that chamber. Senator Lipman knew all too well the importance and power of having representation in legislative bodies. On Saturday, November 7th, when the election was called for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, Linsey was on the air with George Stephanopoulos. And he asked her what that moment would be like to watch Kamala Harris sworn in as vice president. And this is how Linsey responded. She said, "What a moment. And I'm thinking about the future of it and the history of it at the same time. Of course, this year we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving some women in this country the right to vote. But think about it like this. In 1964, when Kamala Harris was born, Black women in the country still couldn't vote. And so the magnitude of this moment certainly is not lost on Black women, and likely many women in general. The idea of this dream deferred for far too long for the likes of Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to run for president in 1972, and the countless and nameless others who dared to not even dream of it because they didn't think that it could happen. So I'm especially thinking about the little girls of all colors, but in particular, Black and brown girls, because there's so much power in seeing someone who looks like you, being able to watch Kamala Harris achieve and excel and crack that second highest glass ceiling. And if they're able to harness all of the possibility of that trajectory for themselves. So it is with this historic moment as the backdrop that we come together to hear Linsey Davis speak to Ascension 2020, Black Women in Media, Politics, and Power. Linsey, I turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Debbie. I'm really honored to be a part of this event, and what a time to be alive, really. It's just incredible what we have been enduring, what we are celebrating, what we are on the verge of. I feel like I've been aging in presidential years. And you know how the presidents end up, they go in, 4 years later, they have the white hair and much older. And, I think all of us have certainly endured 2020 in various ways. But as this year closes out, it has just been quite a time. The good, bad, and ugly. But look, it has been said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And Shirley Chisholm put it this way: if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And those were not just her words, but those were her actions as the first Black woman elected to the United States Congress, who later, as Debbie just talked about how I had said on the day that it was formally announced that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had won the election, that in 1972, Shirley Chisholm went on to be the first African American to run for president of the United States on a major party ticket. Her campaign slogan was "Unbought and Unbossed." And in many ways, Shirley Chisholm really set the table, the literal and figurative table for Kamala Harris and the many others who now hold high-ranking positions in city government, state legislatures, Congress, and beyond. And when the 117th Congress assembles in January, there will be more women than ever before, a record of at least 135 women. This past November, 49 women of color were elected. And you can look no further than Atlanta, Chicago, San Francisco, Washington, D.C. Several of America's biggest cities are now run by Black women. Certainly there were others before Shirley Chisholm who ran as independents and never quite garnered the same name recognition as Chisholm. Black women have long, though, had a history of ambition in the world of politics. Women like 38-year-old Charlene Mitchell, who you may have never heard of. She ran as a communist in 1968. And at the time, it was not uncommon for Black women to consider themselves communists, to battle Jim Crow, lynchings, and unfair labor practices. In 1988, psychologist Lenora Fulani ran as an independent and received more votes for president in a U.S. election than any other female candidate. Monica Moorhead ran on the Workers of the World ticket, and she was relentless because she ran in 1996, in 2000, and again in 2016. Cynthia McKinney, Carol Mosley Braun, Angel Joy Jarvis, they all dared to dream. And on a local level, again, as Debbie mentioned, we had Wynona Moore Lipman. And I'm a Jersey girl. born and raised in South Jersey, so I have to, of course, give a shout out to Miss Lipman, who represented the 29th legislative district in New Jersey Senate and became the first African-American woman to be elected to the Senate when she won her seat in 1971, and then went on to serve for 27 years, which made her the Senate's longest serving member at the time of her death in 1999. She was certainly a true trailblazer and pioneer. And look, as we're talking about this historic moment for this woman from California, right, Senator Kamala Harris, or now actually Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. In 1952, there was another Black woman from California who, well before the Voting Rights Act of 1965, joined a long shot Progressive Party ticket, selected to run for vice president, Charlotta Bass. She took to the stage at the Chicago convention that year, proclaiming, "Historic for myself, for my people, for all women. For the first time in the history of this nation, a political party has chosen a Negro woman for the second highest office in the land." And now in this country's 244-year history, for the first time, we have a woman and a woman of color cracking that second highest glass ceiling, becoming our vice president-elect. And between slavery and Jim Crow and the overall marginalization in general of Black women in American society in particular, it has been a long time coming. For too many nameless and countless Black women, that dream was deferred. And if you think about it, you know, people like Rosa Parks, you know, she was, of course, a prominent face of the civil rights movement, but even the Black women who helped organize the movement were kept out of the leadership roles. And while many women earned the right to vote 100 years ago with the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1964, when Kamala Harris was born, Black women in this country still didn't have the right to vote. And so here we are, 55 years since the Voting Rights Act, sending a Black woman to the White House, a house built by slaves, no less. And there are certainly a number of firsts that come along with this achievement. For the first time, we have a woman who is first and second in line to become president of the United States. Of course, we're talking about Kamala Harris, followed by Nancy Pelosi. For the first time, we'll have a second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, an entertainment lawyer, and as the husband of Madam Vice President Harris, he reportedly plans to quit his law firm to support his wife's career and focus on his role at the White House. And in that same vein, for the first time, a vice president-elect, I kind of got a kick out of this, just talking about the change of this moment, that Kamala Harris, that night, that historic night that she and Joe Biden gave their speeches, she walked out on stage to a song by Mary J. Blige. It's called "Work That." And that was playing as she greeted America on this historic occasion, and then later thanked Black women, calling them the backbone of democracy. Many of you probably remember that Senate race in Alabama in 2017. It was the first time in 25 years that Alabama elected a Democrat to the Senate, and Black women were credited with carrying Doug Jones to victory. 98% of Black women in Alabama voted for Jones over his opponent, Roy Moore. You might remember he had been accused by 8 women of sexual misconduct, including several who were teens at the time. And Black women and men certainly played a pivotal role in this presidential election, especially in cities like Philadelphia, Detroit, Atlanta, Milwaukee. I'm reminded of Reverend Jesse Jackson, who said in 1984 regarding the progress of Black voters in the last century, "Hands that once picked cotton will now be president. Pick a president." And one woman in particular who is credited with helping to turn Georgia blue is, of course, Stacey Abrams. I had the chance to interview Abrams shortly after she lost the contested governor's race in Georgia. And she told me then something that she has said on a number of subsequent occasions. She said that after that disappointment, that after feeling cheated out of becoming the country's first Black female governor, that she sat Shiva for 10 days. And then I started plotting, she said. And I'm seeing that there are people who are saying they can't hear anything. Is there anything that you need me to do, Pooja? Are we okay?
You're good.
Okay. And so anyway, so she said that she sat Shiva for 10 days, and then I started plotting. And by plotting, she started helping people to realize the value of getting to the polls. She started registering people to vote. She's credited with getting about 400,000 new voters registered before the presidential election this past November. And she wanted to make sure that there would be a free and fair election in Georgia, something that she felt she didn't get. And what I later learned through subsequent research was that Abrams had a notable mentor. Now, while Abrams was getting her master's degree in public policy at the University of Texas, Austin, her professor was none other than Congresswoman Barbara Jordan of Texas, the first Black woman elected to Congress by a former Confederate state. Abrams was among the last students that Jordan taught prior to her passing. And it has been said that Jordan was a personal hero for Abrams, a quote, guide to the exercise of American political power and a model of her own ambition. And there's this interesting chain of events that happens here. So Barbara Jordan was such a force that almost a decade before Geraldine Ferraro's historic run for vice president in 1984, the story goes that Barbara Jordan's name was floated as a possible running mate for President Jimmy Carter. And do you know who made that suggestion? An advisor to Carter at the time, then Senator Joe Biden. So way back in 1976, Joe Biden thought that it was a good idea to name a Black woman as VP, and that woman was Barbara Jordan, who didn't get chosen, but went on to inspire a woman who helped make the election of the first Black female vice president possible. And history will also likely remember the significant role of people like Jim Clyburn. After all, it was the Black vote in South Carolina that was credited with saving his campaign. Congressman Jim Clyburn was touted in the Washington Post as, quote, changing everything for Joe Biden. During the primary, when it looked like the Biden campaign was on its last leg, hanging on by a thread, it was just days before the primary in South Carolina when Clyburn endorsed Biden, and he told his constituents at the time, I know Joe, we know Joe, but most importantly, Joe knows us. And that was a pivotal moment. Biden went on to win South Carolina, and the rest is, as they say, history. And while it already feels like history, like an eternity ago, it was just a few short weeks ago on that cold November night in Delaware when newly elected President Joe Biden said in his victory speech, the African-American community stood up again for me. You've always had my back, and I'll always have yours. And in having their backs, he is making sure that Black people have a seat at the table. Biden has already promised to have the most diverse cabinet in history. According to one Biden transition official, of the 500 plus members that were recently announced, more than half are women. Black people have representation greater than their share of the US population, a first for a presidential transition. More than 25% of all the teams are being led by Black men or women, many of them graduates of historically Black colleges and universities. In contrast, under the Trump administration, a Washington Post tally found that of the 59 people who have held cabinet positions or served in top White House jobs, only 7 have been people of color. Only one, Ben Carson, the HUD secretary, is Black. And just this past Sunday, President-elect Joe Biden announced that 7 top members of the White House senior communications staff, all of them are women. Now, one thing that hopefully we can all agree upon is that representation matters. Who is in the room matters. And I was tasked today with talking about Black women in media, politics, and power. And there's certainly a lot of intersectionality. Quite often it comes down to who has the platform or microphone or influence to talk about and become the change agents on the issues that matter. And here we are in 2020 where and I like to often quote scripture, if that's okay, but in 2 Corinthians, it talks about it this way. It says, we are pressed on every side by troubles, right? You have this historic pandemic, unemployment that's high, social injustice, police brutality, all issues that have and continue to disproportionately impact African Americans. If you look at the first quarter of this year, African American workers had the highest unemployment rate nationally at 6.3%. That's according to the Economic Policy Institute. Black people make up 13% of the US population, but 20% of the COVID deaths, dying at more than twice the rate of white people. And according to the Census Bureau in 2019, 18.8, so we're talking about nearly 20% of Black Americans were living in poverty, and that was even before the pandemic. Now, what the future vice president has said of her role in the Biden administration is that one of the first things that Joe Biden told her is that he wants her to be the first person in the room and the last person in the room. And what she has said is that she will offer him her perspective of a woman who grew up a Black child in America, who was a prosecutor, who also has a mother who arrived here at the age of 19 from India, who also likes hip hop. And what we have also heard her say is that while she may be the first, she will not be the last. And I would imagine, or perhaps hope, that does not just apply to young Black and brown girls with political aspirations, but future and current journalists and lawyers and doctors and girls and women who dream, whatever it is, of something bigger, whatever that might entail. On a personal note, I can remember very vividly being a young girl in the living room watching Debbie Thomas. I don't know if you all remember Debbie Thomas, but it's the Black figure skater who got a bronze medal in the Winter Olympics. And I was inspired by that. I didn't have any aspirations of being a figure skater, but here she was, a young Black woman excelling in an arena where quite often you didn't see Black women in that space. And it planted something in me that I'm sure my parents had already nurtured and cultivated. But this idea that I could be anything that I wanted to be, that my skin color would not determine my destination or preclude me from living up to my potential. And so when ABC News gave me the opportunity to sit at the table for the Democratic presidential debate in 2019, I did it not realizing at the time that I was only the third Black woman in American history to participate in presidential debates. But I did it knowing that it might just allow a young girl who's at home sitting and watching in her living room to realize her trajectory was not limited by her skin color. And it was also an important message to America at large, once again, that representation matters. And I started off my line of questioning during that September 2019 debate, asking the questions that were on the young minds of young Black voters. And we were on the campus of Texas Southern University, which is, of course, an HBCU. And I felt, if not me, then who? If I don't ask these questions, who's going to? And I was able to ask Senator Harris and Senator Klobuchar about their criminal justice past as former prosecutors. And this was before the so-called racial reckoning and George Floyd. This was just knowing, having this acute awareness that criminal justice is a major issue, or I should say criminal injustice is a major issue in Black and brown communities. And having that knowledge and being able to ask the people who we could ultimately hold accountable for this in part, I think is meaningful. And again, why it's so important to make sure that you have a diverse number of people who are sitting at the table. Additionally, I was able to ask Joe Biden about how he thinks the legacy of slavery that exists in our country today in various forms should be rectified. And at a second debate that took place earlier this year in February, I was able to ask Mayor Pete Buttigieg about why Black marijuana arrests went up under his leadership when he was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Issues of criminal justice and beyond that impact the Black community were on the table simply because I was given a seat. And I have to admit, initially I was nervous about that seat at the head table with millions watching. And so I basically have a routine now to kind of help out with the nerves, is like I over prepare, and unwittingly and totally unaware of the connection at the time between Barbara Jordan and Stacey Abrams, or Barbara Jordan and Joe Biden. I was scouring the internet about Texas Southern University because that was the location of the debate. And what comes up with the name Barbara Jordan, a member of the inaugural class at Texas Southern University, a Black college that was hastily created by the Texas legislature in order to avoid having to integrate the University of Texas. And then I came across her keynote address at the 1976 Democratic National Convention, in which she said, in this really resounding, powerful, confident voice, "I feel that notwithstanding the past, that my presence here is one additional bit of evidence that the American dream need not forever be deferred. And it was followed by rousing applause, but for decades, followed by very little action in the way of ensuring equal access to that dream. And certainly in politics, we've been relatively slow to move the meter. In this country's history, again, 244 years old, and yet we've only had 10 Black senators. Two of them were during Reconstruction, so we're talking about more than 150 years ago. But now it appears that we could be at the doorstep of change, possibly really meaningful change. And I'll leave you with this. I recently heard a sermon that said something to the effect of, sometimes where you sit determines what you see, and what you see determines what you do. And so that's one big takeaway for me about this historic moment that is much bigger and goes far beyond Kamala Harris as an individual, and speaks to the broader community of young girls, Black and brown girls in particular, about harnessing all that potential and realizing just what is possible. And so I didn't want to take up all the time here and not have time then for questions. So I'm going to yield back the rest of my time and open it up for questions.
I'm trying to start my video. I think I can do it. There I go. Well, Linsey, that was great. And this would be the moment that the room would stand and give you a huge round of applause. This is also weird, right? To do this. Don't you feel like you're kind of talking and you're sort of like, I'm in this room and I'm chatting away to myself. And if anyone walked by, they'd think I'm crazy. But I thought that was a fantastic talk. And it really hit home for me. And the work that we do at the center is so much about this issue of representation and why it matters. You know, why does it matter to have that diversity at the table, and why it matters to have women and people of color represented, to bring those lived experiences, and to bring a different voice and a different perspective. And it also reminded me so much of that Marian Wright Edelman quote, founder of the Children's Defense Fund, about you can't be what you can't see, right? And until those images become real to you, it's hard to imagine for yourself in the future, that future you, that you could be that thing. And so all of these breakthroughs, all of these firsts, young women seeing you in the job and in the position you were in, inspiring. It's so spot on and poignant. I'm going to get to ask you the first question, which is, you mentioned the fact that Joe Biden has put into place this kind of historic, lots of history going on, but this historic group of women to lead the communications arm of the White House, both in his office, the vice president's office, the first lady's office. And diversity among those women, lots of diversity, lots of women with young children, right? So all kinds of interesting life experiences. How do you think that's going to change the way the media, first of all, how the media will be treated by the White House? It can only get better, right? But also the way in which the stories will be told, the framing, and how the media will interact with the White House because of that kind of a team.
You know, well, I think it's interesting, and I'm going to kind of answer in very much the way that you quoted me answering George's question on the actual day that we officially determined Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to have won the election, in that I'm thinking about the future and history of it at the same time, right? So much has changed about how we have interacted with the White House in the past 4 years, right? And so I think in some senses, we're going to really go back to I'll call it normalcy, or the routine exchange, relationship, dynamics that happen between the media and White House. I think we're going to see, okay, in some ways we're stepping backwards, right? We're going to go back to this, what it once was, what we all kind of had come to know and expect of this relationship. So that's one point that we're going to go back. And at the same time, I think we're going to go light years ahead, because having this diversity, and I'm going to be opinion. I'm going to give my opinion, though. As journalists, we don't really do that, but I think women have a different touch, and can bring a little bit of a nuance that quite often, I don't know that men often or always have. And so I think that there will be a difference having so many women right on the front lines there. I think that women, I won't say we're better, but I think we're very effective communicators quite often. I think that goes back to even when you look at like the book from decades ago, like men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and I think that a large part of that book was about how women are really good communicators and kind of want to talk, and men are not necessarily as eager to have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations. And so I think that that's going to probably be a welcome change, a welcome adjustment to that relationship. And, the freedom of the press is so important that they made an amendment about it. Right. And I think that there was some concern sometimes during the past 4 years that was being chipped away, or there were at least attempts to chip that away. And so I do think that we're going to have this time of restoration, which will only benefit us all. I mean, I think that communication is so key on so many levels to having success at virtually anything that you do.
Great. So the questions are coming in, and I'm getting them on my phone, so don't be distracted by my looking down here. So one of the members of the audience asked, what should we be watching for in the early days of the Biden administration, and what will you be watching for?
Well, I think that the priority so much right now is the pandemic. And, I mean, there were several promises, pledges, whatever you want to call them, made ahead of time during the campaign. And so it's going to be a matter of, is the Biden-Harris administration following through with that? Chief among them, Joe Biden has been saying for months now that he would make a national mask mandate. Now, that is something that's going to be met with a lot of adversity, maybe not even just by the citizens of this country, but also the governors and local officials in various states. And that's where I think that the concern is the division that exists, right? In that, many people will remember that, when President Obama first got, and I don't even think he was then senator. I think he was running still for the Senate in Illinois when he made that famous speech about, we're not red states and blue states, we're the United States. But I think that, again, we have taken some steps back, and we really are red states and blue states, and red counties and blue cities. I mean, the division, right? I mean, that's something that we've been talking about now for months and maybe even years, that it's just at this really heightened state. And many, analysts have said that since the Civil War, we have not been this divided. So I think that just having that, I mean, it seems simple enough on its face, that the idea of everybody wear a mask, right? Sounds easy, sounds simple, sounds safe. I think that's going to be met with a lot of controversy. So I don't know how easy that's going to be to have this national mask mandate, but I do think that the pandemic is so paramount, such a top priority for this administration, and how they handle it. And I guess what I'm going to in particular be watching is the differences, right? Because I mean, there was this coronavirus task force that the White House had, and headed up by Vice President Pence, and so I guess I'm just really interested to see how the strategy changes, what kind of shift are we going to see when you have, again, because President Trump had touted the people that were on his task force as the top scientists and the best minds, and now we're hearing that from the Biden-Harris administration, and so I'm very curious to see how their ideas get implemented, how receptive we are to them as a country.
Another question came in. Do you think Kamala Harris's efforts will be hampered by implicit bias?
That's a good question. I'll tell you this. Martha Raddatz, who many of you may know, she sometimes anchors This Week and has been our foreign, all things foreign kind of brain trust for decades here. But she traveled 6,000 miles across the country in the lead up to the election and talked to just, average voters, average Americans. And, there was more than one person who said, because a lot of people would give their explanation, like, I'm voting for Biden because of this, I'm voting for Trump because of this, right? And they would give, one I thought was really plausible, was a business owner. He was saying, well, Biden, if he gets in, it's going to have to be like a mandatory $15 minimum wage, and that's going to, kill my business or whatever, right? People often gave justifications for why they were voting for Biden or Trump. But there were several people who said, and I can't vote for Biden because, well, Kamala Harris. And they would give no explanation. And to me, that was so telling, because it was like nothing else needs to be said. With kind of a wink and a nod, why I can't vote for Kamala. Why I can't vote for Joe Biden, because of Kamala. And when I would hear people say that, it really took me aback. I mean, I am well aware racism still exists in this country. It's not like, there's any wool over my eyes. But sometimes hearing people make comments like that, it's like, wow, this is real. This is something that she's going to have to contend with and face. Fortunately, I think that a lot of the power that's given to the president and ultimately the vice president, they can take you with them kicking and screaming. You don't necessarily have to be on the same page that they're going to be able to move forward. In some cases on their agenda, a lot of that will still be up to, obviously, the Senate, that's still kind of hanging in the balance with those two Senate races that are going on in Georgia. But by and large, I think that whether you like Kamala Harris or not, whether you think that, because of her race or gender, that she's not able to do the job, fortunately, in a lot of scenarios, regardless of who that person is, whoever is in that seat, they do have some power to try to, move forward with or without the cooperation of all of the citizens.
The questions are pouring in now. So the next one is, it was especially notable and important that at the Democratic debates, you didn't only ask candidates of color about racial justice issues and women about gender. You asked that of all of them. And I wonder if and how you thought about that in planning, and how you decided who to ask which questions.
Well, I mean, I think that it's something that we can't just talk about race with the minority candidates, right? Because especially if you want to be the leader of the free world, you need to have your eyes open to the idea of race and racism and social injustice. And this was, again, George Floyd. And so it was really important to me. Actually, probably more important to me how the white candidates would respond to questions of race than it was the black or brown candidates. Because I think that inherently, when you live it, when you walk around in black or brown skin every day, you kind of have some awareness of what's going on. And I think that sometimes you can be removed if you don't have that every day, that social interaction or observations that you make. And so, yeah, I think it was more important to me how the non-black and brown candidates would respond to those questions, and to make sure that they were aware. The unfortunate thing is, a lot of times when you ask those questions, you don't really get answers. and that's the unfortunate scenario, and you just kind of get sound bites at what they want to say or their spin. I was happy that I was able to and sometimes you don't always have a second bite or a third bite at the apple to really follow up on your question, because there's a certain time that all of the moderators have and everything is very, you've got to get to your certain points. And so sometimes you kind of have to let the American people just hear the non-answer and move on. But with that second debate in February in New Hampshire, when Pete Buttigieg was trying to dispute the facts of in particular what I was presenting, because he was answering about apples and I was asking about oranges. Right. I was asking him about, in particular, Black arrests with marijuana. He was like, well, the arrests went down. That's true. We were both making true statements, but we were having two different separate conversations. He was saying that under his leadership, overall arrests went down. That is true. My question was about why the Black arrests went up. And so I did have a chance to try to recalibrate, though I don't know that we really ultimately got the answer. But I just think that those are important questions. And the one thing that I'll say, and I'm sorry, I'm answering this a little bit too long, but the one thing that I think is unfortunate is I don't think it should be expected that only the Black and brown moderators ask the questions that apply to Black and brown people, you know, and that's not always the case. I'll say for some, very few of the white moderators ask questions. Again, I do know that there were some, but it's very rare that we hear these questions asked. And I don't think that just because you're Black, you have some ownership over that segment of questions. And I think that white people should be, as we saw then in May with the murder of George Floyd, or the killing of George Floyd, we should all be just as concerned about racism and social injustice and criminal justice in this country.
Another one came in about, there are a number about the Trump era and what it has meant for media, but I think this one sort of sums it up. How has the Trump era changed our thinking about truth and facts, and how has it changed the way journalists work and the degree to which journalists feel free to label lies, inaccuracies, or deceptions? And I think you're seeing that even more now in the sort of post-election. Every time there's a mention of, you know, that the election was rigged or that there was lots of fraud, journalists saying, you know, unfounded, not true. But that's been an evolution, I think.
It definitely is an evolution. That's a really good word, Debbie, I would say, in that, you know, because it's been 4 years now, almost 4 years of President Trump. And while there have been these kind of like fact checks or Washington Post or New York Times that have said, now he's over, you know, he's had more than 20,000 lies or whatever. But in real time, I think I'm going to use Twitter as an example. It wasn't until like a few months ago that Twitter actually started, you know, marking some of his tweets as like could include like false information or untrue or whatever, right? That was just recently. And I would say that similarly with most of mainstream media, we've been kind of late, reluctant, dragging our feet to really say, that's not true. That's inaccurate. The facts don't support that. You know, I think that it has been there a little bit, but again, to use your word, Debbie, I think that there's been this evolution. I think people were aware, but, you know, I think that there is quite often this reverence for the position of president, that people are often slow to really hold their feet to the fire and say, that's a lie, you know? I would say that as far as, you know, the habits of people and our perceptions of the truth, because I think that there was the first part of the question was really about addressing that. You know, I mean, I think it's kind of unfortunate that we all, Americans, the studies show, research suggests that we watch what validates our own beliefs. And so if I am really conservative, then I'm just going to watch Fox News. I'm going to watch things that substantiate and support what I want to believe is true. And if I'm really liberal, maybe I'm just going to watch MSNBC. I mean, whatever it is. And so it's not to pick on left or right. I think just in general, it's kind of like we like this safe little neat space that doesn't challenge our thinking, that doesn't open our thinking, that doesn't expand our thinking. And I think that that's unfortunate. I, as much as I'm able to consume news that happens outside of this building at ABC, I'm all over the place. I want to sample. I want to see, what are people saying? Maybe this is a perspective that I hadn't thought about. Maybe I hadn't considered this. And I don't, personally, as just a viewer, I don't want to just hear everything that I already think validated or verified. I want to hear. It's just like with friends or a conversation. I just want to know, like, well, what do you think about that? Before I answer, what do you think? I'd like to hear some other input. And as the mother of a son who's 6 years old, it's the same way. I don't want to just put into him just only what I think. I ask for his opinion, and what are his friends saying? What does he think? And I just think that that's a healthier perspective, is to be open to not just what you believe always is your truth, but open to other people's realities.
Following up on that, we have a question from actually Senator Lipman's niece is one of the people that are watching, Sandra DeGenest, and she has a question that dovetails perfectly with this conversation, which is the racial and political divide in this country is so real. And I think in some, the political divide clearly plays out in what you were just describing, these different worlds that we only pay attention to what's going on in the news from a perspective that we already agree with. But her question is, do you think it will ever be healed or repaired? There's a big one for you.
That is a lofty question. Well, you know what? I think that the answer is this. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, more than half of the children in this country are not white. And because we are, whether you like it or not, this evolving, again, I'm keep using that word, Debbie, of yours, but into this society, before it was said of like New York City, but really the country, we are becoming this melting pot. And so I do think that the more we, and it's interesting, I'd done a story a few years ago about a prominent advertisement company here, and they select, or it's a modeling agency, they select the models for the ads. And the lady was saying to me, and this was even years ago, she said, we are looking for, and the stars of tomorrow are kids who are ambiguous. Their race is ambiguous. You don't know, because we're trying to have this catch-all in this one child. And so they could be Asian, they could be Black, they could be Latino, they could be white. They're just this hodgepodge, just mixture of a whole bunch of different stuff, so that they appeal as broadly as possible and as across the board. And so I'm thinking about that, because I think that, and even if you look at like the younger generations, there is more of an open-mindedness. There is more of a, and especially when you look at the protests. I mean, the protests that resulted as a result of, in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and beyond, was young people. Older people were a part of it, but the young people were driving it. And so that does give me hope that because, the other interesting thing that I thought was really unique about that is, we were talking about race, right? On the heels of these deaths that were, prominent headlines, and the Black people, but the stakeholders, the real, like, largely the protests were not Black people. The people who were protesting were not Black people. It was people who were like, maybe before, didn't pay attention, weren't aware, kind of had some excuse that it just like wasn't top of mind. But when they saw the George Floyd video, they say, this has to stop, right? This is too much. It's enough. And I'll never forget, there was an older white man who was protesting, and he was holding a sign, and the sign said something to the effect of, I finally get it. right? Because Black people have been saying this for a long time, right? And nobody really like was even either listening or cared or whatever the scenario was. It was kind of like, yeah, it doesn't kind of get into my lane, so I'm just going to stay in my lane. We're staying in your lane, and so I think that those two things kind of give me hope that we'll get to that place. One is that we're all kind of becoming just this like multiple racial hodgepodge. And two, that the young people are deciding, hey, the way my grandparents think, the way my great grandparents think, that's messed up. Like slavery was wrong. And the fact that, there's still these legacies of slavery that exist in healthcare and education and in business and employment, like we need that up and we need to change that. I think that the fact that you have those two points that are coming together at the same time, it's probably going to still be a while. I don't know. Like I said, I have a 6-year-old son. I don't know. Will it happen in his lifetime? Maybe as an adult, maybe at one point he's going to say, well, what was this racism that you speak of? I don't know. I hope so.
Yeah, it's something to aspire to at least, right? Yeah. So there are so many in our country right now, and frankly, including the President of the United States, who have not accepted the win of the Biden-Harris team. And I'm wondering about your take with that, what that means for the future of voting rights and the conduct of future elections, including, the one that we are going to have on January 5th.
Well, I think that because the president has such a large pulpit, if you will, microphone, if you will, it can seem like it's really widespread and rampant. I'd have to see the hard numbers, but I think that by and large, the majority of people, I mean, we've seen even like Chris Christie, the big Trump supporters who've been out there, and they've said like, hey, enough, guys. It's over. This legal team is an embarrassment. That was the word, the term that national embarrassment is what Chris Christie called it. And, I think that while we have some people who do kind of have megaphones saying it's not true, so you're hearing that a lot. I don't know if generally on Main Street, sure, there are people who don't want to accept the results of the election, right? I'm not trying to dismiss that there are people who feel like, but you had Barr, yesterday coming out and saying and he is the ultimate yes guy to Donald Trump, right? And he comes out and says, hey, no evidence of widespread anything that would at least change the result of the election. And so again, when you have some of Trump's biggest supporters, and yesterday we had the Republican in Georgia who was saying, enough, come on, stop, this is getting dangerous, people are going to get hurt. So I think that Republicans were slow, and actually also he said, like, if you don't say anything, that you're complicit. So he was encouraging Republicans to speak up and say enough is enough. And so I do think that while there are people, right, who are going to doubt the legitimacy of the election, I don't think it's like half of the country. I would say, I think it was 71 million people who voted for Donald Trump. I don't know the numbers, but I don't think that it's all 71 million who are refusing to accept the results.
Yeah, some of the polling is showing that it's among Republicans, it may be closer to like 70% who doubt. The polling is varied, but I think it's a really hard question to poll on, because I think what you're probably polling on mostly is just party identification, not really what they think about that.
Right.
So, and I thought it was also striking that in that Georgia exchange yesterday, when that election official spoke out, it was really to ask for help in quelling the violent threats that Republicans who are doing their job of counting votes are coming up against. So it's wild times.
And what's more is that a lot of the secretaries of state and the commissioners and the people who respond, many are Republicans.
Yeah.
And they're saying, no, we're validating the election results. Like, no, Donald Trump, you lost. I think that's actually one of the things that the Georgia election official said yesterday. And
right.
So I do think that we are in a pickle when we have a really large number of Americans who then start doubting the democratic, process of voting and elections. I think that we do get in trouble with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is going to be our last question, and we're going to end on a kind of a different note and be mindful that we are at Rutgers University with students and young people. And this pandemic, we've seen it in classrooms. It's been hard on young people and on our students here at Rutgers. And I'm wondering if you have any advice about how young people, and especially young women, can stay hopeful about their education and their careers and their future in these trying times.
Right. I would say look at history. History is the best indicator quite often of what happens in the future. The Spanish flu, was that what it's called? The Spanish flu in 1900, right? Apparently this kind of thing happens every roughly century. And it was a lot worse then, right, in 1900, but we ultimately rebound and things ultimately kind of quote unquote normalize again, right? And so tough times don't last always. And this is a tough time. I mean, this isn't, the word has been used probably second only to pandemic this year, has been unprecedented.
Right.
And I think, though, that we have to look at that we've been through hard times before as a country. Again, I was talking before about the division during the Civil War and the change then and other pandemics. And so I think that I can't imagine living in despair and imagining that things won't get better, right? I mean, that to me is just not even an option. And so I think that just like with anything, with your perspective on life, I think it's the same as when it applies to education or planning a family or whatever it is. We have to look toward the light. We have to find that there is going to be a way out of this. And so I would say, I think that it's been a really a time of a lot of self-reflection and maybe thinking, people have been taking the gap years and really thinking about what is your passion? What is it that you really love? Or what, as far as your career, what, excites you? But, I do, I guess I would normally, but I won't, because I already did like a little scripture from the Bible, but that would normally be what I would turn to at this point. But it's that optimistic expectation that good conquers evil, and that we are gonna find ourselves beyond this day, and so then we just have to be ready at that time. I don't think it's like people say, what if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. So I wouldn't wait until it gets better to then decide, oh, okay, well now I'll continue my education or whatever. I think you got to keep going through the darkness and continuing on, and especially if it's something that you're passionate about, I think you're going to find a way to keep at it. And so, yes, I would definitely encourage young people to be persistent and expectant that things are going to change, that things are going to get better, and that you will be ready to meet the moment when it does.
And if you can survive 2020, you can survive anything, right?
That is exactly right.
Linsey, I want to thank you so much. I can't imagine a better person to come and speak to us in this moment and kind of reflect on what we have been watching for the last 4 years, but particularly through this election. And as we look to the future of a really very different kind of administration that's going to be much more reflective of of America, and where women and people of color are having a voice in ways that we haven't seen for a while, and in many ways we've never seen. So thank you so much, and I would love to have you back again in the future when you can be in a room
In person.
in person, and you can hear all the applause. And we can also have your book. One of the things I did not mention in my introduction is that you are a best-selling author of 2 really lovely children's books, right? 2 or 3?
Yes,
Yeah.
2, and one's coming out in February. Yes.
And one coming out. And when you come back and you're here in person, we will sell the books and you can sign them for people. So thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody who joined us today for taking the time in the middle of the day. And we're thrilled to keep going and having the Senator Wynona Lipman chair. And you did her legacy proud, Linsey. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate it. Thanks, Pooja, for all the coordination.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.